My daughter uninvited me and told me to watch her wedding online. But what happened next? Frank Miller held the phone with trembling hands, still trying to process the words he had just heard. His daughter Jennifer had just called to say he was no longer welcome at her wedding. "Dad, I'm sorry, but Richard and I decided it would be better if you watched the live stream," Jennifer said on the other end, her voice cold and distant. "You understand, right? It's a formal event. And—" "Jennifer, my girl, I'm your father," Frank interrupted, his voice breaking. "What do you mean I can't come to your wedding?" "Dad, please don't make this harder than it already is. Richard comes from a very traditional family and they wouldn't feel comfortable with..." "With what?" "With a construction worker? With someone who can't afford a new suit?" The silence on the other end was more painful than any shout. Frank leaned against the wall of his small, simple home, staring at the cracks in the paint he had promised to fix years ago, but never had enough money for. "It's not about money, Dad, it's about social fit." "Social fit?" Frank repeated the words like poison in his mouth. "Jennifer, I raised you alone after your mother left us. I worked double shifts for years to pay for your college, so you could have a better life. And I'm grateful for that, Dad. But now I have a new life, a new family. Richard's a lawyer, his family has status, and I'm just a construction worker who embarrasses you, is that it?" "Dad, you'll get the live stream link. The wedding will be beautiful. You'll be able to see everything." The call ended, and Frank stood frozen, holding the silent phone to his ear as if he could still hear the voice of the daughter he had raised with so much love and sacrifice. 3 days later, Frank sat in his worn-out armchair with his neighbor's borrowed laptop precariously balanced on his knees. The wedding livestream was about to begin. He had spent the whole morning getting ready, even though he knew no one would see him. He put on his newest dress shirt, the one he only wore for special occasions, and carefully combed his graying hair. The screen showed a lavish church decorated in white and gold, arrangements that probably cost more than he made in a year. Guests arrived in luxury cars, all dressed in elegance he could never dream of affording. Frank scanned the crowd for familiar faces, but recognized no one. Not even Jennifer's college friends, who used to visit when she still lived with him, were there. It was as if his daughter's entire past had been erased. When the wedding march began, Frank's heart raced. There was his Jennifer, beautiful in a dress straight out of a fairy tale, walking alone down the aisle. No father to give her away. The tradition had simply been cut to avoid the embarrassment of a construction worker leading the ceremony. A little girl," Frank whispered to the empty screen, tears blurring his vision. He remembered when Jennifer was small and played wedding in their backyard, using her mother's bedsheet as a veil and making Frank play every role. The father walking, her down the aisle, the minister marrying them, even the groom. She always said that when she grew up, Frank would be the most important man at her wedding. Throughout the ceremony, Frank watched every detail, trying to memorize moments he should have been experiencing in person. He saw Jennifer say, "I do." Saw them kiss, saw them declared husband and wife, but it felt like watching a stranger's life. The welcome party was even more grandiose. Their hall with crystal chandeliers, tables decorated with expensive arrangements, and a buffet that seemed to serve hundreds of people. Richard, the groom, gave a speech thanking all the guests, mentioning his parents, the godparents, his friends. But Frank's name was never spoken. It was as if Jennifer had been born an orphan. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. When the livestream ended, Frank remained seated in silence for hours, staring at the black screen of his laptop. The apartment was quieter than ever. Not even the noise from the neighbors seemed to break the weight of that silence. In the following days, Frank tried to maintain his normal routine. He woke up early, drank his black coffee with day-old bread, and headed to the construction site where he was helping build a residential building. But his co-workers noticed he wasn't himself. The man who always had a joke ready or a funny story to tell during lunch now ate in silence, lost in thought. "Frank, are you okay?" asked Mike, his closest co-worker. "It's been a week since you've said much of anything." Frank looked at his friend, considering whether to share his pain. Mike was a simple man like him, but he had a close-knit family. His kids visited every Sunday, bringing his grandchildren to see him. It was the kind of life Frank had always dreamed of having. "My daughter got married last week," Frank finally said. "That's great, Frank. How was it? You must be over the moon." "I wasn't invited." Mike nearly choked on his sandwich. "What do you mean you weren't invited? You're her father." "She said it would be better if I watched online, that the groom's family wouldn't feel comfortable with me there." "That's just wrong, Frank. A child who does that to their parent isn't worth much." But Frank shook his head. "No, Mike, it's my fault. I couldn't give her what she needed. I couldn't be the father she deserved. You raised her alone, worked like a dog to put her through college. What more could a father do? Be someone she isn't ashamed to, introduce to others." That conversation with Mike kept replaying in Frank's head for the rest of the day. When he got home that night, he looked at himself in the bathroom mirror for the first time in weeks. He saw a 55-year-old man, wrinkles etched by sun and hard labor, calloused hands and simple clothes. He tried to imagine how he would look in the middle of Jennifer's elegant party and understood with a pang in his chest why she had made that decision. But understanding didn't ease the pain. 2 weeks after the wedding, Frank was working on the 10th floor of the construction site when his phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. "Hello? Mr. Frank Miller, this is Karen, assistant to Mr. Richard Thompson. Could you come to his office today at 4 in the afternoon? It's about your daughter, Jennifer." Frank's heart raced. "What happened to Jennifer? Is she okay?" "She's fine, sir. But Mr. Richard needs to speak with you urgently." The rest of the day passed in a blur for Frank. He could barely focus on work, imagining 1,000 possibilities for that summons. Was Jennifer sick? Had something happened at the wedding? Did Richard want to make it official that Frank should stay out of their lives? At exactly 4 in the afternoon, Frank stood in the reception area of the most elegant law firm he had ever set foot in. The marble floor shone so brightly that he could see his reflection, and the leather armchairs looked like they cost more than his yearly salary. He felt completely out of place there, with his clean but faded jeans and wrinkled dress shirt. "Dr. Richard will see you now," said the receptionist, a young blonde who looked at him with a mix of curiosity and poorly disguised disdain. Richard Thompson was a man in his early 30s, well-dressed and radiating the kind of confidence that only comes from never having known financial hardship. His office was bigger than Frank's entire house, with a panoramic view of the city and furniture that looked like it came straight out of a decor magazine. "Mr. Frank, thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Frank settled into one of the chairs across from Richard's desk, feeling even smaller in that environment. "Dr. Richard, what happened to Jennifer? Is she okay?" Richard sighed and folded his hands on the desk. "Jennifer is physically fine, Mr. Frank, but she has been going through a tough time since the wedding." "Tough how?" "She's been crying a lot, not sleeping well, and yesterday she confessed something to me that has me very worried." Frank's heart raced even faster. "What?" "She said she made the biggest mistake of her life by not inviting you to the wedding, that she deeply regrets it and can't stop thinking about her father watching everything alone on the internet." Frank felt like he'd been punched in the gut. She said that." "She did. And that's not all. She's been asking about you constantly. Wants to know how you are, if you're okay, if you're not too hurt by what she did." "Then, why doesn't she just call me directly?" Richard hesitated before answering. "Because she's ashamed, Mr. Frank. She knows she did something terrible and can't find the courage to face you." "Ashamed?" Frank repeated, incredulous. "I'm the one who should be ashamed. I wasn't the father she needed." "With all due respect, Mr. Frank, I think you're wrong. Ever since I've known her, Jennifer has always spoken of you with so much love and pride. She talked about how hard you worked to put her through college, how you raised her alone after your wife passed. She's always been so proud of the father she has." "Then why did she do it?" Richard finished the question. "Honestly, Mr. Frank, I think she let herself be influenced by the world she stepped into after graduating. The social pressure, the expectations of the people around us. Sometimes we make choices that don't reflect who we really are. Frank fell silent, processing those words. For weeks he had blamed himself, convinced he wasn't good enough for his daughter's new life. But now Richard was suggesting the opposite. "Dr. Richard, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you agree with what she did?" Richard took a deep breath before answering. "No, Mr. Frank, I don't, and that's exactly what I told her when I found out about the decision. A father should be at his daughter's wedding, no matter what. That's a tradition that exists for a very special reason. Then why didn't you stop it?" "I tried, believe me. But Jennifer was determined. She said it was for the best, that it would be less awkward for everyone involved. I didn't agree, but I respected her choice." Frank stood from the chair and walked to the office window. Below, the city moved at its usual pace, people coming and going, each carrying their own joys and sorrows. "What do you want from me?" "Dr. Richard, I want you to talk to her. Jennifer needs your forgiveness, but more than that, she needs her father back in her life. What if she can't forgive me for who I am?" Richard stood and walked over to where Frank was standing. "Mr. Frank, can I tell you something?" Frank nodded. "My father owns one of the largest law firms in the city. I grew up with everything money could buy. I went to the best schools, traveled the world, never lacked for anything material. But do you know what I admire most about Jennifer's story?" "What?" "The fact that she was raised by a man who gave up everything for her, who worked from sunup to sundown to give his daughter dignity and an education. My father gave me money, Mr. Frank. You gave Jennifer love, sacrifice, and character, and that's far more valuable." For the first time in weeks, Frank felt a small relief in his chest. Maybe he wasn't the failure he thought he was. "Dr. Richard, where is she now?" "At home in our apartment. She hasn't gone out much since the wedding." "Do you think she'd want to see me?" "I'm sure she would. In fact, I can call her right now and tell her you're here." Frank nodded, and Richard picked up the phone. "Jennifer, it's me. Listen, there's someone here who'd like to talk to you. Your father." There was a long pause on the other end, and Frank could hear the muffled sound of Jennifer crying. "She wants to talk to you," Richard said, handing him the phone. With trembling hands, Frank took it. "Jennifer? Dad?" Her voice came out as a choked whisper. "Dad, I'm so sorry. My daughter. Dad, I ruined everything. I was the worst daughter in the world. How could I do this to you?" "Jennifer, stop crying. It's okay." "It's not okay, Dad. Nothing's okay. I kept you from the most important day of my life. You, the most important person in my life." Frank had to lean on Richard's desk because his legs went weak hearing those words. "Sweetheart, I understand why you did it. I really do." "No, Dad. You don't understand because there's no excuse. I was cowardly. I was cruel. You were my daughter trying to live in a world different from the one I could give you." "What different world, Dad? The world you gave me was perfect. It was full of love, care, sacrifice. And I threw it all away because of shame. Shame of what? The best father in the world?" Now it was Frank who was crying. Richard discreetly left the office, letting father and daughter talk in private. "Jennifer, I want to see you. Do you forgive me, Dad?" "Sweetheart, there's nothing to forgive. You're my little girl. You always will be." "I'm coming right now, Dad. What's the address?" Richard returned to the office and gave the address. Half an hour later, Jennifer arrived at the office still wearing her pajamas under a hastily thrown-on coat. Her eyes were red from crying, but when she saw Frank, she ran into his arms like a little child. "Dad, I missed you so much." They held each other for long minutes, father and daughter reunited after weeks of pain and separation. "Jennifer, are you okay? Are you happy?" "I am now, Dad. Now that you're here, I am." "And Richard, does he treat you well?" Jennifer looked at her husband, who watched the scene with a smile. "He treats me very well, Dad. And you know what? He's the one who insisted I talk to you. He said a wedding without the bride's father wasn't a complete wedding." Richard stepped closer to them. "Mr. Frank, I'd like to ask you something." "What?" "I'd like you to give us the chance to make things right this time." "How so?" "We want to have a vow renewal ceremony, small, simple, just for family and close friends, but this time with you walking Jennifer down the aisle, as it should have been from the start." Frank looked at Jennifer, who smiled through her tears. "What do you think, sweetheart?" "I think it would be perfect, Dad. If you accept, of course." "Of course I accept. But will it really be a simple party? Because I don't have the right clothes for—" "Dad," Jennifer interrupted, "I don't care if you come in your pajamas. I just want my father there with me." They laughed together for the first time in weeks, and Frank Miller felt that his family was finally starting to come together again. Over the following weeks, Frank and Jennifer talked every day. She began visiting him at the old house, bringing Richard along so he could better understand the life she had come from. Richard showed genuine interest in Frank's stories, asking about his work, the struggles he'd faced raising Jennifer alone. "Mr. Miller," Richard said during one of these visits, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course, son." Richard smiled at being called son. "How did you manage to raise Jennifer all by yourself? It must have been really hard." Frank looked at Jennifer, who was arranging coffee cups on the small kitchen table. "You know, Richard, I won't lie and say it was easy, because it wasn't. Working all day and then coming home to take care of a little girl, help with homework, cook, do laundry. There were days I'd collapse into bed exhausted. And Jennifer's mother, if it's not too personal to ask." Jennifer stopped what she was doing and looked at her father. It was a topic they rarely discussed. "Rebecca was a good woman," Frank said slowly. "But she was very young when Jennifer was born, only 19. The responsibility was too much for her. She didn't want to stay." "She did, but it was hard. I didn't make much. We lived in a place even smaller than this, and Rebecca felt like she was losing her youth. One day she said she had to leave, that she'd come back when she was ready to be a mother. Jennifer was 3. "And did she come back?" Richard asked. "No. We got a card from her once, 2 years later. She was living in Miami, had married another man, said she thought about us every day but had built a new life there." Jennifer moved closer to her father and took his hand. "Saucia, Dad, you never told me she sent a card." "I didn't want you to have false hope, honey, and honestly, I was angry at her. I felt that after all that time, she had no right to reappear in our lives, even if it was just with a card." "Do you regret not showing it to me?" Frank thought for a moment. "Sometimes, yes, maybe you had the right to know. But at the time, I was doing what I thought was best to protect you." Richard watched the conversation in silence, impressed by the honesty of this simple man. "Mr. Miller, can I say something?" "Of course." "You did an amazing job raising Jennifer. She's a strong, caring, hard-working woman. She learned all that from you. Richard's right, Dad. I am who I am today because of you." Frank was moved by those words. For so long, he had wondered if he'd been a good father, if he'd given his daughter everything she needed. "You know what makes me proudest about Jennifer?" Frank continued. "She's always been determined. Even as a little girl, once she set her mind to something, she saw it through. Even when things got tough at school or when kids made fun of her. Because she didn't have the same things they did, she never gave up." "The kids made fun of you?" Richard asked. Jennifer sighed. "They did. I was the only one in class without brand-name sneakers, who brought lunch from home instead of buying it at the cafeteria, who couldn't go on the expensive school trips." "And how did you handle that?" "My father always told me that we couldn't control what others thought or said, but we could control how we reacted to it. He taught me that a person's worth isn't in what they have, but in who they are." "And did it work?" "Most of the time, yes. But I admit there were moments when I really wanted a different life. I wanted to buy the things my friends had. I wanted to travel on vacation like they did." "That was natural, daughter," said Frank. "You were a child. Children want what they see others having. But you never made me feel guilty about it. Because it wasn't your fault for wanting nice things. It was my responsibility to try and give the best I could within our means." Richard was increasingly impressed by the wisdom of the man who had raised the woman he'd fallen in love with. "Mr. Frank, can I ask you another question?" "Go ahead." "What did you think when you found out Jennifer was dating me?" Frank smiled. "First, I was happy because she was happy. Then, I got worried." "Worried about what?" "About you finding out where Jennifer came from and not thinking she was good enough for you." "Dad," Jennifer exclaimed, "how could you even think that?" Daughter, it's reality. Richard comes from a wealthy family, went to the best schools, has a very different social standing than ours. It was natural for me to worry. Mr. Frank, Richard said, can I tell you what I thought when I learned Jennifer's story? Of course. I thought I'd found a special woman, because anyone can be born rich, but not every rich person develops the character Jennifer has. And that character she learned from you, through the hardships you faced together. Richard is right, Dad. The struggles we went through taught me to value every achievement, every opportunity. They made me understand the worth of hard work, honesty, and persistence. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Frank was feeling more at ease with Richard, but there was still one thing bothering him. Richard, can I ask you something now? Of course, Mr. Frank. Why didn't you stop Jennifer from cutting me out of the wedding? Richard lowered his head, clearly embarrassed by the question. That's a question I ask myself every day, Mr. Frank, and the answer doesn't make me proud. What's the answer? The answer is that I was a coward. I knew it was wrong. I tried arguing with Jennifer a few times, but when I saw she was set on it, I gave in. And I gave in. Because part of me was afraid of how my family would react. Richard, Jennifer tried to interrupt. No, Jennifer, your father deserves the truth. Mr. Frank, my family has certain expectations about the kind of people we associate with, and as the eldest son, I've always felt the pressure not to disappoint those expectations. And would I disappoint them? In their minds, maybe, but not in mine. The problem was I didn't have the courage to stand up to them back then. And do you now? Richard looked Frank firmly in the eye. I do. In fact, I already have. I told them what happened, said I'm ashamed of how we treated you, and made it clear that from now on you're part of our family whether they like it or not. And how did they react? At first they weren't happy. My father said, I was being too emotional, putting feelings above reason. My mother was worried about what the family friends would think. And then I told them that if they couldn't accept and respect my wife's father, then they'd have to choose between having a son or keeping up their social concerns. Jennifer looked at Richard with a mix of surprise and admiration. She didn't know he had confronted his family like that. Richard, did you really do that? I did. And you know what? I don't regret it, because I learned something important from everything that happened. What? I learned that family isn't just about sharing the same last name or the same bank account. Family is who stands by your side when things get tough, who loves you no matter what. And you, Frank, have shown that kind of love for Jennifer her whole life. Frank was moved by those words. For the first time since the wedding, he felt like he might truly be part of his daughter's new life. And your family? Have they changed? Their minds? Some have, others are still resisting. My father remains skeptical, but my mother has shown interest in getting to know you better. And my younger brother said he admires my attitude. I don't want to cause problems in your family, Richard. Mr. Miller, you're not causing any problems. The problems were already there. They just weren't obvious. In fact, this whole situation was good for showing me who really cares about me and who only cares about appearances. They kept talking for hours, and Frank realized he genuinely liked Richard. The young man had made a mistake, just like Jennifer, but he was willing to own up to it and make things right. When Richard and Jennifer were getting ready to leave that night, Jennifer hugged her father tightly. Dad, I want to apologize for one more thing. What else, sweetheart? For staying away so long. After I graduated and started working, I kind of distanced myself from our life here. It was true. Over the past 2 years, Jennifer had visited her father less and less. At first, she came every Sunday, then only on weekends, then just occasionally. Honey, I understand. You were building your own life. No, Dad, that's no excuse. I was pulling away because I was almost ashamed of where we came from, and that's unforgivable. Jennifer, let me finish, Dad. I started working at a fancy law firm, started spending time with people from a different social class, and little by little I convinced myself that our life here was inadequate. And now I realize that I was the one who was inadequate, because there's nothing more adequate than the love, the kindness, the dignity you've always given me." Richard placed a hand on his wife's shoulder. "Jennifer, we all make mistakes. What matters is recognizing them and fixing them. Richard's right, sweetheart, and you're already fixing it. Being here today, talking to me, apologizing, it means a lot. Dad, I promise I won't drift away again. No matter where life takes us, this will always be my home, and you'll always be the most important person in my life." In the weeks that followed, Jennifer started visiting Frank regularly again. She brought Richard along most of the time, and they began to develop a family routine. Frank cooked for them on weekends, showing Richard his simple but tasty recipes. Richard, in turn, started helping Frank with practical matters, like organizing his paperwork and explaining some employee benefits he hadn't known about. One day, as the three of them prepared lunch together in the small kitchen, Jennifer asked a question that had been on her mind for days. "Dad, have you ever thought about getting married again?" Frank stopped chopping onions and looked at his daughter. "Sometimes, yes, but I always thought it would be complicated." "Complicated how?" "Well, you were always my priority, and I was afraid of bringing someone into our lives who might not get along with you or make you feel threatened." "Dad, but I'm an adult now. You have every right to have your own life, your own happiness." "And do you have someone in mind?" Richard asked, joining the conversation. Frank turned red, which didn't escape Jennifer's notice. "Dad, you do? Who is it?" "It's nothing serious, Jennifer. Dad, tell us." Frank sighed and sat down at the kitchen table. "There's a woman who works at the pharmacy near the construction site where I'm working. She's a widow, around 50. Sometimes we talk when I go in to buy painkillers for my back. And nothing, it's just conversation. She seems like a very kind, very sweet person. She has 2 grown kids who live in other cities." "What's her name?" "Susan? And you've never thought about asking her out?" "Jennifer, I'm a 55-year-old construction worker. What would a woman like her want with me?" "Dad!" Jennifer exclaimed. "You're a wonderful man. Any woman would be lucky to have someone like you." "Jennifer's right, Mr. Miller," Richard added. "You're honest, hardworking, and caring. Those are qualities many women value." "You really think so?" "We're sure of it," they replied in unison. "What if she says no?" "What if she says yes?" Jennifer shot back. Frank smiled. It was comforting to have his daughter encouraging his happiness instead of feeling threatened by it. "Maybe I'll ask her out for coffee one of these days." "That's the spirit, Dad. And if she says yes, maybe you could invite her over to meet us." The idea of introducing a possible girlfriend to Jennifer filled Frank with a joy he hadn't felt in years. For so long he'd put his personal life on hold to focus entirely on his daughter. Now, with Jennifer married and living her own life, maybe it was time to think about his own happiness. A few days later, Frank was finishing up at the construction site when he decided to stop by the pharmacy for painkillers. His conversation with Jennifer and Richard had stayed with him, and he was determined to at least try. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Susan." "Good afternoon, Mr. Miller. How are you?" Susan was an attractive woman for her age, with brown hair lightly streaked with gray and a warm smile. She always showed genuine interest when asking about his life. "I'm all right. Just needed some painkillers for my back." "Of course. The usual?" "The usual." As she fetched the medicine, Frank took a deep breath and gathered his courage. "Mrs. Susan, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Mr. Miller." "Would you like to have coffee with me sometime?" "Outside the pharmacy, I mean." Susan smiled, and Frank noticed she blushed slightly. "I'd love to, Mr. Miller." "Really?" "Really. In fact, I've been waiting for you to ask for weeks." "You've been waiting?" "I have. Every time we talk, I think you seem like such an interesting person, and I'd love to get to know you better." Frank could hardly believe what he was hearing. Susan actually seemed interested in him. "How about Saturday afternoon? I know a nice cafe nearby." "Perfect. What time?" 3 o'clock. "It's a date." Frank left the pharmacy feeling like a teenager. How long had it been since he'd felt this way? Probably before Jennifer was born. When he got home, he immediately called his daughter. "Jennifer, it's me." "Hi, Dad. How was work?" "Sweetheart, I did what you suggested." "What?" "I asked Susan out for coffee." "Dad, And she said yes. She did. And she said she'd been waiting for me to ask. That's wonderful, Dad. I'm so happy. When's the date? Saturday afternoon. Are you nervous? A little. It's been a long time since I've gone out with a woman. Dad, just be yourself. Susan's going to love getting to know you. Jennifer, can I ask you something? Of course. If things work out between us, would you be okay with seeing me with someone else? Dad, I already said yes. I just want to see you happy. And if Susan can make you smile the way I love to see, then she'll have won my approval. Saturday arrived and Frank was more nervous than he'd imagined he'd be. He'd bought a new shirt for the occasion, the first new piece of clothing he'd bought for himself in over a year. Jennifer had insisted on giving him the money for it, saying it was her gift for her father's first date. The coffee shop was cozy, with small tables and simple but welcoming decor. Frank arrived a few minutes early and chose a table near the window. Susan showed up right at 3, wearing a floral dress and a cardigan that made her look even prettier than she had at the pharmacy. Mr. Miller, it's so nice to see you. You look beautiful, Mrs. Susan. Thank you. You look very handsome yourself. They ordered coffee and began talking. Frank learned that Susan had lost her husband 5 years earlier to a heart condition. She had 2 children, a 28-year-old son who lived in Chicago and worked as an engineer, and a 25-year-old daughter who lived in Denver and was a teacher. And you, Mr. Miller? Tell me about your family. I have a daughter, Jennifer. She got married a few weeks ago. How wonderful. How was the wedding? Frank hesitated for a moment. Should he tell Susan the truth? They barely knew each other, and she might find it strange for a daughter to exclude her own father from the wedding. Well, Mrs. Susan, it was a bit complicated. Complicated how? Frank decided to be honest. Jennifer didn't invite me at first. She said it would be better if I watched online. Susan looked genuinely shocked. Oh my, that must have been so hard. May I ask why? Social reasons. Her husband comes from a wealthy family, and she thought I wouldn't fit in. How did that make you feel? Devastated. But we talked later. She regretted it, and now we're fine. In fact, they're planning a vow renewal ceremony and want me to walk her down the aisle. I'm glad it all worked out. That must have been so painful for you. It was, but it made me realize some things too. What things? It made me realize I'd completely set aside my personal life to focus on Jennifer. And now that she has her own life, maybe it's time I think about mine too. Susan smiled. Is that why you invited me for coffee? That's why. And also because you seem like a very special person. You seem special too, Mr. Miller. Raising a daughter alone couldn't have been easy. Say it wasn't, but it was worth it. Jennifer is an amazing woman. I'm sure she is. People only turn out amazing when they're raised with a lot of love. They spent 2 hours talking, and Frank realized he was having more fun than he'd had in years. Susan was smart, funny, and had a very positive outlook on life despite the hardships she'd faced. When they said goodbye, Frank felt encouraged to make another invitation. Mrs. Susan, would you like to do this again sometime? I'd love to, Mr. Miller. How about next week I cook for you? I make a bean stew that, if I may brag, is really good. I'd love that, and I can bring dessert. It's a deal then. In the weeks that followed, Frank and Susan began seeing each other regularly. She had dinner at his place on Saturdays, and they went for walks together on Sundays. Frank was rediscovering the joy of having a woman's company, someone to share the little everyday moments with. Jennifer was loving seeing her father happy. Richard had also taken a liking to Susan when she was introduced to them, and the four began forming a kind of extended family. One day, during one of those Saturday dinners, Susan made an observation that left Frank thoughtful. Mr. Miller, can I say something? Of course. You're a very special man, but I don't think you realize it. How so? You raised a wonderful daughter practically alone, worked your whole life with dignity, never compromised your integrity or lost your values, and yet you still think you're not good enough for certain situations. It's just, these are different things, Mrs. Susan. Working and being a father is one thing, moving in more refined circles is another. But why do you think you need to move in refined circles? You are who you are, and that's enough. Jennifer had to learn to navigate those environments to get ahead in life. And she learned because you gave her the foundation to do so. But that doesn't mean you have to change who you are. Jennifer, who had been listening to the conversation, decided to join in. Susan is right, Dad. You don't need to change. Thing. The people who truly matter will accept you as you are. That's right, Richard agreed. Mr. Miller, you have qualities that many people born rich will never have. Honesty, simplicity, the ability to sacrifice for others. That's worth more than any title or bank account. Frank was starting to understand that perhaps his perception of himself had been distorted by years of struggle and financial hardship. A few weeks later, the day of Jennifer and Richard's vow renewal ceremony arrived. Unlike the original wedding, this would be a small ceremony held at Richard's house, just for close family and a few intimate friends. Frank had bought a new suit for the occasion, with Jennifer's financial help and Susan's advice on colors and style. When he looked in the mirror that morning, he barely recognized the elegant man staring back. "Dad, you look handsome," Jennifer said when she saw him. The ceremony would be officiated by the same priest who had married Jennifer and Richard originally, but this time in the garden of Richard's parents' house. Richard's family was present, including his parents, whom Frank was meeting for the first time. Dr. William Thompson, Richard's father, was an imposing man in his 60s, with neatly combed grey hair and an air of authority that commanded a respect. His wife, Mrs. Judith, was an elegant woman, clearly accustomed to the city's finest social circles. When Richard introduced Frank to his parents, there was a moment of tension. "Dad, Mom, this is Frank, Jennifer's father." Dr. William extended his hand formally. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Miller." "The pleasure is mine, Dr. Thompson." Mrs. Judith was more cautious, limiting herself to a nod and a forced smile. Frank immediately sensed he wasn't welcome there, but decided not to let it ruin his daughter's day. During the ceremony, when it was time to walk Jennifer down the aisle, Frank felt such intense emotion that he had to compose himself to avoid crying in front of everyone. There was his little girl, beautiful and happy, finally giving him the chance to fulfill the role that should have always been his. "Dad," Jennifer whispered as they walked, "thank you for never giving up on me." "I'll never give up on you, my daughter." When he handed Jennifer over to Richard, Frank looked firmly into his son-in-law's eyes. "Take good care of her. You have my word, Mr. Miller." During the reception that followed, Frank tried to stay discreet, mostly talking with Susan and avoiding situations that might cause discomfort. But little by little, some guests began to approach him, curious to meet the bride's father. One of Jennifer's friends, who had met Frank years earlier when he still picked her up from college, made a point of greeting him warmly. "Mr. Miller, how wonderful to see you here. Jennifer always spoke so fondly of you." "Rachel, how are you, dear?" "Good. And I'm so glad you could finally be here for Jennifer's wedding. She deserved to have her father with her." Dr. William, who was nearby, overheard the conversation and stepped closer. "Mr. Miller, may I speak with you privately?" Frank's heart raced. Was Richard's father going to ask him to leave? They moved to a quieter corner of the garden. "Mr. Miller, I need to apologize to you." "Apologize? For what, Dr. Thompson?" "For my family's behavior at the first wedding. Richard told me everything that happened, and I'm deeply ashamed." Frank was surprised by the man's honesty. "Dr. Thompson, there's no need to apologize. I understand that." "No, you don't. And that's what shames me even more. You shouldn't understand an injustice like that. You should be angry, outraged, indignant. But here you are, polite and respectful, even after how you were treated. I wouldn't hold a grudge in a situation like this. My daughter is happy. That's all that matters." "See, that's exactly it. You have a nobility of character that most of us lack. I, who consider myself a principled man, let social prejudices blind me to what truly matters." "Dr. Thompson, please let me finish. I've spoken at length with Richard about you these past weeks. I learned your story, how you raised Jennifer alone, the sacrifices you made for her. And I realized you've done something I, with all my education and resources, never managed." "What?" "You raised a child who truly loves you. My children. Respect me, obey me, but I don't know if they love me the way Jennifer loves you. and that speaks volumes about the kind of father you've been." Frank was moved by these words from a man he'd assumed would look down on him. "Dr. Thompson, I just did what any father would do." "No, Mr. Miller, you did what an exceptional father would do, and I'd like to ask, if you'll allow me, that from today on we can be real family, not just because of our children's marriage, but because I truly want to know you better." "I'd be honored, Dr. Thompson. And please just call me William. We're family now." They embraced warmly, and Frank felt he was finally being accepted, not just as a tolerated presence, but as a respected member of the family. For the rest of the party, Frank noticed a shift in people's attitudes. Mrs. Judith approached him several times to talk, showing genuine interest in getting to know him. Other guests also became more welcoming, and he began to feel truly included. As the celebration wound down, Jennifer came to her father with tears of happiness in her eyes. "Dad, this was the most perfect day of my life." "Why, sweetheart?" "Because I finally had my father with me at my wedding, and because I saw you being recognized for the wonderful man you've always been." "Jennifer, I was thinking about something today." "What?" "I was thinking that maybe everything we went through was necessary." "How so?" "If everything had gone smoothly from the start, maybe we wouldn't have had the chance to talk about so many important things. Maybe I wouldn't have really gotten to know Richard. Maybe you wouldn't have reflected on what truly matters in life." "You're right, Dad. Sometimes bad things happen to teach us lessons we wouldn't learn any other way. And look at us now. You married and happy, me meeting Susan, our family growing. Dad, can I confess something?" "Of course." "I was terrified to introduce Susan to you." "Why?" "Because I was afraid she wouldn't be good enough for you. After everything you've done for me, I wanted to make sure any woman in your life would be special." Frank smiled. "And what did you think of her?" "I think she's perfect for you. She makes you laugh, takes care of you, and I can see you're happier than you've been in years." "I really am, sweetheart. For the first time in a long while, I feel like I have a complete family." A few months after the vow renewal ceremony, Frank's life had completely changed. He and Susan had grown closer, and she had practically moved into his house. Jennifer and Richard visited them regularly, and even Richard's parents started including them in some family gatherings. Frank kept working as a construction worker, but now with a different perspective on his job. He no longer saw his profession as something that diminished him, but as an honest skill that had allowed him to raise a wonderful daughter and keep his dignity even through hard times. One day, while working on the site, Mike approached him during lunch break. "Frank, can I ask you something?" "Sure, Mike. How did you work things out with your daughter?" "Last time we talked, you were heartbroken." Frank thought for a moment before answering. "You know, Mike, I think the most important thing I learned is that sometimes people make wrong choices out of fear, not malice." "What do you mean?" "Jennifer left me out of the wedding because she was afraid. Afraid I wouldn't fit in, afraid of people's reactions, afraid it would ruin her happiness. It wasn't because she didn't love me." "And how did you figure that out?" "By talking, giving her the chance to explain, to make things right. And most of all, by forgiving. And did it work? Better than I hoped. Now our relationship is stronger than ever, and I even gained a son-in-law who's almost like a son to me, and a girlfriend who makes me very happy. Do you think I should try that with my oldest son? We've been fighting over something silly for 2 years. I think you should, Mike. Life's too short to hold grudges against the people we love." "You're right, Frank. I'll call him tonight." That evening, Frank came home and found Susan making dinner. The house, which had been quiet and lonely for so long, was now always full of life and movement. "How was work today?" Susan asked, kissing his cheek. "Good. I talked to Mike about forgiveness and second chances." "And was he interested?" "He was. I think he'll try to reconcile with his son." "That's wonderful. You're turning into a marriage and family counselor," Susan teased. "I don't know if I'm a good counselor, but I've learned a lot from everything I went through with Jennifer." "What did you learn?" "I learned that true love doesn't hold grudges, that people can change, that sometimes forgiving is harder than asking for forgiveness, but it's always more freeing." "And what else?" "I learned that I'm much stronger than I thought, and that I deserve to be loved and respected for who I am, not for what I have." Susan hugged him tenderly. "I always knew that. I was just waiting for you to realize it too. That night, as they were having dinner, the phone rang. It was Jennifer. Dad, I have news. What news, sweetheart? I'm pregnant. Frank nearly dropped his fork. What? Really? Really? I just took the test. I'm going to be a mother and you're going to be a grandfather. Frank looked at Susan, who was beaming as she listened to the conversation. Jennifer? How wonderful. When? The doctor said the baby should be born in September. September? Frank did the math in his head. That's 8 months away. Yes, and Dad, I want to ask you for something. Anything you want, daughter. I want you to be very present in my child's life. I want them to know the amazing grandfather they have, to hear your stories, to learn your values. I want them to grow up knowing they come from a family of honest, hard-working people. Frank was so moved he couldn't speak for a few seconds. Dad, are you still there? Yes, daughter. I'm just very emotional. Richard is also really happy. And he said he really wants you to teach our son the things you taught me. What things? Values, Dad. Honesty, simplicity, the importance of hard work, of character. Things you don't learn in school. After hanging up, Frank and Susan talked about the news late into the night. Are you happy? Susan asked. Very happy, but also a little nervous. Nervous why? Being a grandfather is a big responsibility, especially after everything that happened. I don't want to disappoint Jennifer again. Frank, you didn't disappoint Jennifer. She was the one who let herself be influenced by others, and now she's learned her lesson. But what if I don't know how to be a good grandfather? You were a wonderful father. You'll be an even better grandfather because now you have more life experience and less pressure. How so less pressure? When Jennifer was little, you were alone, working too much, worried about handling everything. Now you have a family that supports you, a more stable situation, more time to focus on what really matters. That's true. And besides, you have something many grandfathers don't. What? You have a real trusting relationship with your daughter. She wants you in her baby's life because she knows you'll be a positive influence. In the following months, Frank prepared to be a grandfather with the same dedication he had when preparing to be a father years before. He renovated the guest room in the house so Jennifer could stay there with the baby when needed. Susan helped him pick out furniture and decorations. Jennifer visited her father weekly, always bringing updates about the pregnancy. Richard had also become a regular visitor, and Frank noticed his son-in-law truly saw him as a father. One day, during one of these visits, Richard made an unexpected proposal. Frank, can I talk to you about something? Of course, Richard. I have a proposal for you. What kind of proposal? A job offer. Frank looked at his son-in-law in surprise. A job? What kind of job? Well, my law firm is growing fast, and we need someone to handle building maintenance, small repairs, organizing the facilities. I thought of you. Richard, I don't know anything about law firm, but you know about construction, repairs, organization, and most importantly, you're someone we can trust. Would it be an office job? Yes. With employee benefits, health insurance, meal vouchers, all the proper rights, and the pay would be better than what you earn in construction. Frank fell silent, thinking about the offer. Richard, this isn't charity, is it? Of course not. It's a real need at the firm. I've been looking for someone for this role for months but haven't found anyone trustworthy. What does Jennifer think about this? Jennifer loved the idea. In fact, she was the one who suggested it. Why? Because she thinks you deserve a job that's less physically demanding, with better conditions. And also because this way you'd have more time available for the grandson who's on the way. Frank looked at Jennifer, who smiled encouragingly. Dad, you've worked your whole life too hard. Now you can have a calmer job without giving up your independence. But I like what I do. And you'll keep doing it, Dad. Just under better conditions. After many conversations and reflections, Frank decided to accept the offer. The change wasn't easy at first. After decades of working outdoors, adjusting to an office environment was a challenge. But little by little, he got used to it and discovered he really liked the new job. His co-workers at the law firm were initially surprised to have the boss's father-in-law working there, but they soon realized Frank was a dedicated and competent employee. He handled everything with the same care he applied to his construction, work, and quickly earned everyone's respect. One of the things he liked most about the new job was the more flexible hours. It allowed him to be more involved in Jennifer's pregnancy, accompanying her to doctor's appointments and important exams. In September, Michael was born, a healthy, beautiful baby who brought even more joy to Frank's life. On the day of the birth, he was in the maternity ward waiting room with Richard and his parents, all anxious for the arrival of their first grandchild. When Richard came out of the delivery room to announce everything had gone well, Frank cried with emotion. After all the pain and separation he'd been through, he was now there to witness one of the most important moments of his daughter's life. "Dad," Jennifer said when he entered the room to meet his grandson, "I want to introduce you to Michael." Frank cradled the baby with the care of someone who had raised a child alone and knew exactly how to hold him. "Hi, Michael. I'm your Grandpa Frank." The baby opened his little eyes and seemed to look right at him, as if he already recognized him. "Dad, what do you think of your grandson?" "I think he's the most beautiful baby in the world, and I think I'm going to be a very doting grandpa." "You can dote all you want, Dad. You deserve it." In the months that followed, Frank dedicated himself to being the best grandpa he could be. He helped Jennifer with the baby whenever she needed, and Michael seemed to calm down, especially when in his grandpa's arms. Susan also fell in love with the baby and soon took on the role of honorary grandma, helping with his care and showing the same affection she would have for a biological grandchild. A year after Michael's birth, Frank and Susan decided to make their union official. They had a simple ceremony at the same church where Jennifer's vow renewal had taken place, with both families present. Jennifer was her father's matron of honor, and Richard was his best man. Little Michael, now 1 year old, took part in the ceremony as the ring bearer, carrying the rings on a small cushion. During the reception, Frank gave a speech that moved everyone. "I want to thank all of you for being here today. 2 years ago, I was a lonely man who thought I'd lost my beloved daughter forever. Today, I'm here marrying the wonderful woman who gave me back my joy for life, surrounded by my family, which has grown and grown stronger." He looked at Jennifer, who was holding Michael in her arms. "Jennifer, thank you for teaching me that forgiveness is more powerful than pride. Thank you for giving me a son-in-law who became a son, and a grandson who is the light of my life." He turned to Richard. "Richard, thank you for accepting me as family, for giving me the chance to show who I really am, and for taking such good care of my daughter and grandson." Then he looked at Susan. "Susan, thank you for showing me it's never too late to start over, never too late to love and be loved." Finally, he looked at everyone present. "You've all taught me that family isn't just about blood. Family is a choice, it's support, it's unconditional love. And I feel like the richest man in the world because I have a family that chose me, even knowing all my flaws." 2 years later, the family had grown even more. Jennifer was pregnant again, this time with a girl who would be named Emma. Frank and Susan had moved into a bigger house near Jennifer and Richard's apartment so they could help with the kids. Frank had been promoted at the law firm and now oversaw the entire building's maintenance, as well as other company properties. Richard always said he'd never had such a dedicated and trustworthy employee. One day, while watching Michael at the park near their house, Frank reflected on how much his life had changed. The boy, now 3 years old, ran between the playground equipment as his grandfather kept a close eye on him. "Grandpa, come play with me," Michael shouted from the top of the slide. "I'm coming, son." Frank got up from the bench where he'd been sitting and went to play with his grandson. As he chased the boy around, he thought about how blessed he was. After years of believing he wasn't good enough, he'd discovered he was exactly what his family needed. When they got back home, Jennifer was waiting with Emma, who had been born 3 months earlier. "How was the walk, Dad?" "Great." Michael made new friends at the park. "And Emma? How was she?" "Sleeping like an angel, just like her mom when she was a baby." Susan arrived from the pharmacy, where she still worked part-time, and the house filled with the joy and bustle of a close-knit family. That night, after the kids had gone to bed and Jennifer and Richard had returned home, Frank and Susan sat on the porch to talk. "Frank, do you remember how you were 5 years ago?" "I do. Alone, thinking I'd lost my daughter forever. And now I have a wife I love, a daughter who makes me proud, a son-in-law I consider my own, 2 grandchildren who are the joy of my life, and a family that accepts and values me. Do you regret anything?" Frank thought for a moment. "I don't regret a thing. Not even the pain I felt when Jennifer left me out of the wedding. Why? Because that pain made me grow. It made me question things about myself. And in the end, it brought me here. If everything had been easy from the start, maybe I'd never have met you. Maybe I'd never have built such a strong bond with Richard. Maybe I'd never have learned to value myself. Do you think the suffering was worth it?" I think suffering is part of life. It's not good or bad on its own. What matters is what we do with it. And I chose to use mine to become a better person, to strengthen my relationships, to appreciate what I have even more. Susan smiled and took her husband's hand. "That's why I love you, Frank, because you always find the good in things, even in the hardest situations. I've just learned that life's too short to waste on bitterness or self-pity. I'd rather spend my energy loving and being loved." A few months later, at Michael's 3rd birthday party, the whole family was gathered. Besides Frank, Susan, Jennifer, Richard, and Emma, Richard's parents were there, along with some close friends, and even Mike, Frank's old construction co-worker who had become like family. During the party, Dr. William approached Frank. "Frank, can I talk to you for a moment?" "Of course, William." They stepped away from the group. "I want to tell you something, Frank." "What?" "You've changed our family for the better." "How so?" "Before you came into our lives, we were a family that cared too much about appearances, about social status, about what others thought. You taught us what truly matters." "I don't think I taught you anything." "Yes, you did. You taught by example. You showed that it's possible to be dignified without being rich, to be respectable without titles, to be noble without an important last name." "William, let me finish. My grandchildren are growing up in a family that values character more than money, honesty more than convenience, and that's thanks to you." "It's not just thanks to me. Jennifer always had those values. She did because you taught her, and now she's passing them on to her children with all of our support." Frank was moved by those words from a man he had once believed would never accept him. "Thank you, William. That means a lot to me." "Frank, can I ask you for something?" "Size, of course." "Never change. Keep being exactly who you are, because that's what our family needs." As the party was winding down and guests began to leave, Michael approached his grandfather. "Grandpa, will you always stay with me, sir?" "Always, my love. Why do you ask?" "Because I love you so much, Grandpa. And I love you too, Michael." "Grandpa, when I grow up, can I work with you?" "Of course, my boy, but first you have to study hard." "Why?" "Because education is important. It's how your mother was able to build a better life." "But you didn't study, and you're a good person." Frank smiled at his grandson's innocence. "That's true, Michael, but I had to work much harder because I didn't study. If you get an education, you can choose the kind of work you want to do." "Okay, Grandpa, but I still want to work with you." "And I'll be very happy if you do." That night, after everyone had left, Frank helped clean the house and put everything in order. When he finally lay down, he looked at Susan, already asleep beside him, and realized just how complete his life had become. 5 years earlier, he had watched his daughter's wedding alone through a computer screen, feeling rejected and inadequate. Now he was surrounded by a family who loved and valued him, grandchildren who adored him, a job that brought him satisfaction, and a wife who made his days happier. He had learned that sometimes life's greatest pains prepare us for its greatest joys, that true love always finds its way back, and that it's never too late to start over, to forgive, to love, and be loved. Frank fell asleep that night with a smile on his face, grateful for every winding path that had led him there, because now he knew that every hurt, every tear, every moment of loneliness had been worth it to experience the fullness he now lived. The next day, a quiet Sunday, the whole family gathered at Frank and Susan's house for their traditional lunch. It was a custom they had created. Every Sunday, the family came together to share a meal and catch up. Michael ran around the backyard, with Emma crawling after him, while the adults set the table and prepared the food. Frank watched this scene of domestic happiness and remembered the lonely Sundays he had spent after Jennifer's wedding. "Dad," Jennifer said, interrupting his thoughts, "what are you thinking about?" "I was thinking about how quickly life can change. For better or worse, for better, much better. Are you happy, Dad?" "Very happy, my dear, happier than I ever imagined I could be." "Me too, Dad, and do you know why?" "Why?" Because I finally have the complete family I always dreamed of. A father I'm proud of, a husband who loves me, healthy children, and a stepmother who cares for all of us with such warmth." Susan, who had been listening while seasoning the salad, smiled with emotion. "Jennifer, thank you for welcoming me into your family." Susan, I'm the one who should thank you for taking such good care of my father. He deserved someone special in his life." Richard joined the group, holding Emma in his arms. "You know what I find most beautiful about this family?" "What?" everyone asked in unison. "It's that everyone here chose to be here. No one is together out of obligation or convention. We're all here because we truly love and respect each other." "Richard is right," said Frank. "This family was built with love, forgiveness, and second chances. That's why it's so strong." During lunch, they talked about plans for the future. Jennifer and Richard were thinking about having another child. Frank and Susan wanted to travel to visit her relatives out of town. Michael had just started preschool and was loving it. "Dad," Jennifer said at one point, "do you remember when I was little and we used to dream about the future?" "I do." "Did you ever imagine our lives would turn out like this?" "Not exactly like this, but I imagined it would. Be good. I always had faith you'd be happy." "And you, did you imagine you'd be happy too?" Frank thought for a moment. "To be honest, no. For a long time I believed my happiness depended on yours, that if you were happy, that would be enough for me." "And now?" "Now I understand that I can be happy for myself too, that I can have my own life, my own dreams, my own relationships, and that doesn't take away from the love I have for you at all." That's so important, Dad, because your grandchildren need to see that it's possible to be happy at any stage of life." After lunch, while the children took their afternoon nap, the adults sat on the porch to talk. These were the moments Frank cherished most with his family, when everyone was relaxed, unhurried, just enjoying each other's company. "Dear Frank," Richard said, "can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "What would you say to a father going through what you went through a few years ago?" "What situation exactly?" "Feeling rejected by his daughter." Frank thought carefully before answering. "I'd say it's natural to feel hurt, but you shouldn't make decisions based on pain. You should try to understand your daughter's reasons, even if you don't agree with them. And most importantly, you should always leave the door open for reconciliation. And if the daughter didn't want to reconcile, then I'd say he should keep loving her from afar, but not stop living his own life. Because sometimes people need time to grow and realize their mistakes." "Did you ever think about giving up on Jennifer?" "I did. There were moments when I thought maybe it was better to accept that she'd chosen a life I wasn't part of." "So why didn't you give up?" "Because deep down I knew she loved me, and because I believe true love always finds its way back." Jennifer, who had been listening quietly, was moved by her father's words. "Dad, you were right. Love found its way back, and now it's stronger than ever. It's true, sweetheart. Sometimes you have to almost lose something to truly appreciate what you have." That afternoon, as Richard and Jennifer got ready to take the children home, Michael refused to leave. "I want to stay with Grandpa and Grandma." "Michael, you need to go home and sleep in your own bed." "But I like sleeping here." Frank crouched down to his grandson's level. "Michael, how about you come spend the whole day with Grandpa tomorrow?" "Really? Really, Grandma Susan will make chocolate cake and we'll play in the backyard." "Okay, but you promise, Grandpa." "I promise." When they finally left, Frank and Susan were alone in the house, which now felt too big after being full of people all day. "Susan, do you ever regret marrying me?" "Why are you asking that?" "Because our life is so busy. always full of grandchildren. Son-in-law family, don't you ever miss more peace and quiet? Susan laughed and hugged her husband. Frank, I spent 5 years living alone after my first husband passed. 5 years of silence, loneliness, an empty house. Now I have a home, full of life, love and joy. How could I regret that? Are you sure? Absolutely sure. Besides, I married you knowing exactly what our family was like. I knew there'd be grandchildren, son-in-law, chaos, and that's exactly what drew me in. What? The chance to be part of a big, close-knit family. My own children live far. Away, I rarely get to see them. With you, I gained a present, loving family that includes me in everything. And you don't feel overwhelmed? Quite the opposite. I feel useful, cherished, needed. And most of all, I feel loved. That night, Frank had trouble sleeping, but not from worry or sadness. It was from happiness. He was so full, so fulfilled, that his mind wouldn't quiet down. He got up carefully so as not to wake Susan and went to the living room, where he looked at the family photos scattered across the shelves. There were pictures of Jennifer as a little girl, of her wedding to Richard, of the grandchildren's births, of his own wedding to Susan. He picked up a recent photo taken at Michael's last birthday party, where the whole family was gathered. In the backyard. He studied each face there and realized he knew them better than he had known himself just a few years ago. Jennifer, beautiful and radiant, holding Emma in her arms. Richard smiling genuinely, with Michael on his shoulders. Susan arm in arm with him, happy and relaxed. Richard's parents, who now treated him like a beloved member of the family, and himself at the center of the photo, surrounded by everyone he loved. It was a family picture in the truest sense. Not just people who shared blood or a last name, but people who had chosen to love, support, forgive, and grow together. Frank put the photo back and returned to the bedroom. Susan stirred as he lay down. Can't sleep? I can now. Were you worried about something? No, I was too happy to sleep. Susan smiled in the dark. I feel that way sometimes too. I wake up in the middle of the night and think about how all of this is real, how we managed to build this beautiful family. Sometimes it feels too good to be true. But it is true. And you deserve all of this and more. They fell asleep in each other's arms, grateful to have found in one another not just a partner, but an accomplice in building a full and happy life. The years passed, and the family kept growing and growing stronger. Michael became a smart and affectionate boy who loved spending time with his grandfather, learning about plants in the backyard and listening to stories about the past. Emma grew into a sweet artistic girl who loved drawing family portraits and always included Grandpa Frank and Grandma Susan in her creations. Jennifer and Richard had another child, a boy named Ethan, who was born when Michael was 5, and Emma was 3. Frank became a grandfather for the 3rd time with the same joy as the first, and Ethan quickly became another source of happiness in the family. Frank kept working at Richard's law firm until he was 60, when he decided to retire. The company threw him a farewell party, and all the employees signed a thank you letter for his years of dedication and camaraderie. Mr. Frank, said the law firm secretary during the party, you'll be greatly missed here. I'll miss all of you too. What do you plan to do in retirement? I plan to enjoy my grandchildren, tend to my garden, travel a bit with Susan, and most of all, cherish every day God gives me. You're going to be a very happy retiree. I hope so. And indeed he was. Frank's retirement was everything he had dreamed of. He started picking up his grandchildren from school 3 times a week, helped with their homework, took them to the park and taught them basic gardening and carpentry. Michael, now 8, had developed a passion for building things with his hands, inspired by his grandfather. Emma, 6, loved helping her grandmother Susan in the kitchen and had become an excellent baking assistant. Ethan, 3, was still discovering his preferences, but had already shown himself to be a very smart and observant little boy. One afternoon, while Frank was watching the children, Michael asked a question that made him thoughtful. Grandpa, why? Are you different from other grandpas? Different how, Michael? My friends' grandpas only see their grandkids at Christmas and birthdays. You're always with us. It's because I really love being with you. But don't the other grandpas love their grandkids? Frank stopped watering the plants to focus on the conversation. They do, Michael. But sometimes families live differently. Some grandpas live far away, others work a lot, others have different responsibilities. And you don't have other responsibilities? I do. But you kids are my most important one. Forever. Forever. Emma, who was playing nearby, joined in. Grandpa, when you die, will you still take care of us? The innocent question touched Frank deeply. Emma, Grandpa doesn't plan on leaving anytime soon. But when my time comes, you'll have all the things I've taught you stored in your hearts. And in that way, I'll always be taking care of you. What kind of things? Things like being honest, working hard, loving family, forgiving when someone hurts you, never giving up on your dreams. And those things will stay with us forever, always. And when you have kids of your own, you'll teach them the same things. So you'll be our kids' grandpa too? Frank smiled at his granddaughter's childlike logic. In a way, yes. When Jennifer came to pick up the kids that afternoon, Michael told her about their conversation. Mom, Grandpa said he'll take care of us forever, even after he dies. Jennifer looked at her father curiously. What were you all talking about? The kids asked about family, about why I'm always present in their lives. And what did you say? I told them they're my priority, that's what family means. Dad, can I tell you something? Of course. You're giving your grandchildren something not everyone can give. Real presence, true attention, unconditional love. And that will shape their lives forever. I hope so, because they're shaping mine in ways I never imagined. How so? Being a grandpa has given me a second chance at fatherhood, but now with less pressure and more wisdom. I can enjoy every moment because I'm not worried about handling all the practical responsibilities. I can just be the grandpa who plays, teaches, tells stories, and gives affection. And that makes you happy? Tremendously happy. That night, Frank and Susan talked about his conversation with the grandchildren. Do you think you're being a good grandpa? Susan asked. I think I'm trying to be the best I can. But sometimes I wonder if I'm being too present, if I'm getting in the way of the upbringing Jennifer and Richard want to give them. Do you think you're interfering? I don't know. Sometimes I'm afraid I'm being too permissive, that I'm spoiling them too much. Frank, being affectionate isn't spoiling. Giving attention isn't ruining them. You're teaching these children important values, showing them what it means to have a present and loving grandfather. But what if I'm undermining their parents' authority? Have you talked to Jennifer and Richard about this? No. Then talk to them. Ask if they think you're being a good grandfather, if there's anything they'd like to be different. The following week, Frank had this conversation with Jennifer and Richard. Dad, you're asking if you're being a good grandfather, said Jennifer, incredulous. You're the best grandfather these kids could ever have. But sometimes I worry I'm interfering with the upbringing you want to give them. Dad, Richard interrupted, you're complimenting. Our parenting, not interfering. The kids learn things from you that we, working all day, sometimes don't have the time or patience to teach. What kind of things? Patience, observation, the value of life's simple things. Michael learned from you that planting a seed and caring for it until it grows is more interesting than any video game. Emma learned that listening to stories can be as fun as watching television. And Ethan? Jennifer asked. He's still little, but he calms down when he's in your arms. He already recognizes your voice, your scent, your affection. What do you want me to keep doing? Exactly what you're doing, they answered in unison. Dad, Jennifer continued, do you know what makes you different from other grandfathers? What? You're building memories with your grandchildren, memories they'll carry for the rest of their lives. When they're adults, they'll remember the afternoons in the backyard with Grandpa, the stories you told, the things they learned from you. And is that important? It's essential, because those memories will shape their character, teach them what family is, what unconditional love is. Richard added, Mr. Frank, my paternal grandfathers were distant people I only saw on special occasions. My maternal grandfathers had already passed when I was born. I never had what my kids have with you. And do you resent that? I don't resent it. but I recognize I missed something important. That's why I value even more what you're giving my children." "Dad," Jennifer said, "you're being for your grandchildren what you were for me, a safe harbor, a reference of love and protection, and that's priceless." Reassured by that conversation, Frank continued dedicating himself to his grandchildren with even more confidence and joy. He created special traditions with each of them. With Michael, they built small woodworking projects every Saturday. With Emma, they had drawing and painting sessions every Wednesday. With Ethan, who was still very little, there were story time moments before his nap. A year later, when Frank turned 62, the family threw a surprise party that brought together not just relatives, but also his old construction and office co-workers, neighbors, and even Mike, his former construction buddy, who had become a close family friend. During the party, several people gave speeches about Frank. Mike spoke about the dedicated and loyal co-worker. Dr. William talked about the father-in-law who had taught important values to the whole family. Susan spoke about her loving and supportive husband. But it was Jennifer's speech that moved Frank the most. "My father is a special person for many reasons. First, because he raised me alone when he could have given up. Second, because he worked tirelessly to give me opportunities he never had. Third, because he forgave me when I made the biggest mistake of my life. And fourth, because he never stopped believing in love, even when he had reasons to become bitter." She looked directly at her father. "Dad, thank you for teaching me that. Family is about love, forgiveness, and second chances. Thank you for being the wonderful grandfather to my children that I always dreamed they'd have. And thank you for finding the happiness you always deserved." When it was Frank's turn to speak, he was visibly emotional. "A few years ago, I watched my daughter's wedding alone, on my laptop, thinking I had lost the most important person in my life forever. Today I'm here, surrounded by a family that loves me, friends who respect me, living a life I never even dreamed I could have." He looked at each person present. "I've learned it's never too late to start over, that true love always finds a way, and that the best things in life are always the simplest. A grandson's hug, a wife's smile, a family lunch, a conversation with a friend. Thank you all for being part of my story. Thank you for accepting me as I am, for loving me despite my flaws, and for teaching me that life can always be better when we have special people to share it with." The celebration lasted late into the night, and Frank was amazed by how many people truly cared about him. It was proof that he had built a life rich in meaningful relationships. In the following months, Frank began writing his memoirs. It wasn't a grand project, just notes in a notebook about his life, his experiences, and the lessons he had learned. He wanted to leave something written for his grandchildren so they would know his story when they were older. Susan encouraged him in this endeavor, sometimes helping by recalling details or organizing the notes by theme. "Why did you decide to write about your life?" she asked one day. "Because I want my grandchildren to know our family's history, to understand where they come from, and to learn the values we want to pass on to them." "And what else?" "Because I've realized that my life, as simple as it may be, has important things worth sharing." "What kind of things?" "Lessons about perseverance, about not giving up when things get tough, about the importance of forgiveness, second chances, and valuing what truly matters in life." "Do you think your grandchildren will be interested in that?" "Maybe not now while they're young, but when they're older, when they face their own challenges, maybe they'll find something in my experiences that helps them." One day while writing, Frank came across a difficult question. Should he include in his memoirs the episode when Jennifer had excluded him from her wedding? It was a painful part of the story, but also an important one. It was a moment that tested their family's love but ultimately made them stronger. He decided to include it, focusing not on the pain he had felt but on the lessons he had learned, about forgiveness, understanding people's motivations, and not making decisions based solely on emotions. When he showed that passage to Jennifer, she was moved. "Dad, you wrote about this in such a generous way toward me." "I wrote the truth, sweetheart. And the truth is you made a mistake, regretted it, and did everything you could to make it right. That's far more important than the mistake itself." "You don't hold any resentment?" "No, Jennifer. In fact, I'm grateful for how everything happened." Grateful? Why? Because it was through that hardship that our family truly learned to value one another. That's when I got to know Richard better, when you all got to know me better. It's when we learned that love is stronger than any prejudice or social difference. Dad, can I keep a copy of your memories? Of course. In fact, I'm writing them exactly for you to keep. 2 years later, when Michael turned 10, he asked for a different birthday gift. Grandpa, I want you to tell me the story of our family. What story, Michael? The story of when you were young, when Mom was little, how you all got to where you are now. Frank smiled. This was exactly why he had written his memoirs. That night, after the birthday party, when the guests had left and the kids were getting ready for bed, Frank sat with Michael in the living room and began to tell the story. Once upon a time, there was a young man who worked as a construction worker and dreamed of giving his little daughter a better life. Michael listened carefully to every word, asking questions, showing genuine interest in his family's story. Emma, who had begged to stay up a little longer, joined the conversation too. Grandpa, were you really sad when Mom didn't invite you to the wedding? I was, Emma. It was one of the saddest moments of my life. But then you made up? We did. And we became even closer than before. Why? Because we learned that true love is stronger than any problem. And now you'll never fight again? Frank laughed at his granddaughter's innocence. Emma, everyone who loves each other sometimes disagrees. What matters isn't never having problems, but knowing how to solve them with love and understanding. How? By talking, apologizing when we're wrong, forgiving when others make mistakes, and always remembering that what matters most is the love we have for each other. When the kids finally went to sleep, Jennifer came over to her father. Dad, thank you for telling them our story like that. Like what? By showing them that families can have problems, but love always finds a way to fix everything. That's the truth, my dear. And it's important they know there's no such thing as a perfect family, only a family that loves each other enough to overcome imperfections. That night, Frank fell asleep, thinking about how his life had become a beautiful story worth telling. A story of struggle, of hardships, but above all of love, forgiveness, and second chances. In the years that followed, the tradition of sharing family stories became a regular event. Frank created what he called memory nights, when he would gather with his grandchildren to share experiences and teach lessons through real-life stories. Michael, Emma, and Ethan grew up hearing about the importance of honest work, never giving up on dreams, valuing family, and forgiving and being forgiven. These conversations became some of the most precious moments in the bond between grandfather and grandchildren. When Frank turned 65, he took stock of his life and realized he had achieved far more than he'd ever dreamed. He had a close and happy family, a wife who loved him, grandchildren who adored him, and the peace of mind that comes from living by his values. But his greatest achievement, he knew, wasn't material. His greatest achievement had been learning to love and be loved unconditionally, building true relationships, and leaving a legacy of values for future generations. On a Sunday afternoon, while the whole family was gathered in the backyard for a barbecue, Frank observed the scene around him. Susan chatting animatedly with Jennifer about a new recipe, Richard playing soccer with Michael on the lawn, Emma drawing in her notebook, and Ethan sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms. It was a simple, everyday scene, but it represented everything he had ever wanted. A close-knit, happy family where everyone cared for each other with love and tenderness. At that moment, Frank remembered the lonely, hurt man who had watched his daughter's wedding online, thinking he had lost the most important person in his life forever. What a difference a few years had made. Sometimes, Frank thought, life's greatest pains prepare us for its greatest joys. The period of separation and suffering had been necessary for him and Jennifer to appreciate their love for each other even more. The loneliness had been necessary for him to find Susan and discover that it was never too late to love again. As the sun began to set that Sunday evening and the family prepared to say goodbye until the next gathering, Michael approached his grandfather. "Grandpa, are you happy?" "Very happy, Michael. Why?" "Because I want to be just like you when I grow up." "Just like how?" "Just as happy." just as surrounded by family, just as loved by everyone. Frank hugged his grandson, moved by those words. You'll be even better than me, Michael, because you'll have all the opportunities I didn't, but you'll keep the values that truly matter. What values? Honesty, simplicity, love. For family, the ability to forgive and start over. Will you teach me all that, Grandpa? I will, and you'll teach your children too. Promise? I promise. That night, after everyone had left and the house returned to its quiet state, Frank and Susan sat on the porch enjoying the silence and peace of the evening. Susan, have you ever imagined our life in 10 years? I have. How do you imagine it? I picture us surrounded by older grandchildren, maybe even great-grandchildren with even more stories to tell and memories to make. Does that make you anxious? No. It makes me grateful. Grateful for the chance to build a family like this, to have people who love me, to leave a legacy of love and values for the next generations. Do you think you've achieved your dreams? Frank thought for a moment before answering. I've achieved dreams I didn't even know I had. When I was young, I only dreamed of giving Jennifer a decent life. I never imagined I could have such a big, close family, that I could know the love of a woman like you, that I could be a grandfather to such special children. And do you still have dreams? I do. I dream of seeing my grandchildren grow up, graduate, and start their own families. I dream of being a great-grandfather, if God allows it. I dream of traveling more with you, seeing new places, living, new experiences. All possible dreams, all simple dreams, but they fill me with hope and joy. They sat in silence for a few minutes, simply enjoying each other's company and the calm of the night. Frank, can I tell you something? Of course. You're the bravest person I know. Brave, why? Because after going through so much pain, after feeling rejected and inadequate, you chose to keep loving, to keep believing in people, to keep building relationships. I had no choice. Loving is the only way I know how to live. You did have a choice. You could have become bitter, resentful, closed off to love. But you chose the harder, more beautiful path, the path of forgiveness and second chances. And it was worth it. It was absolutely worth it. For you and for all of us who are lucky enough to be part of your life. That night, Frank fell asleep with a smile on his face, grateful for every day of his life, for every person who had crossed his path, for every tear he had shed, and for every joy he had experienced. Because now he knew it had all been worth it. Every hardship, every pain, every moment of loneliness had been necessary to build the full and happy life he now enjoyed. And most importantly, he knew this happiness wasn't his alone. It was a shared happiness, built alongside the people he loved, and it multiplied with every hug from his grandchildren, every smile from his wife, and every moment of family togetherness. It was a happiness that had begun with pain but now stretched like a promise that love always finds a way, that it's never too late to start over, and that the best stories are the ones with happy endings earned through hard work, love, and hope. The end. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're reading from. If you have something to share with us, leave a sincere comment below. Do you think Frank made the right decisions throughout the story? We'd love to hear your thoughts on the power of forgiveness and second chances. Thank you so much for being here with us.